Hello and welcome back to the Tears Will Cry podcast. My name's Kritika.
My name's Amber.
And I'm Parmika. And on today's episode, we have a special guest, and it's our head of year, Mr.Jana. Hi, sir.
Hello, how are you guys?
So, sir,
Good.
introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me first and foremost. Really liking what you guys are doing, using your initiative to do something good, hopefully. And I hope that I can answer all your questions to the expected, desired outcomes that you guys want.
So, what is your least and most favourite aspect of being a teacher?
Least and most favorite. Okay, let's start with the bad. I didn't get into teaching because I feel like it's a means to an end or anything. I genuinely got in because I have a passion for kind of giving back, and that's probably stems from my own kind of experiences as a child, and being not born in this country and coming here and kind of like having to go through that system and adjusting and all of that stuff. I kind of relate to other individuals who have, and I kind of want to give back. So my most kind of pet peeve of teaching would probably be seeing or dealing with some parents
I love that.
who at times have good intentions, mind you, okay? But I think a little bit misinformed or a little bit outdated in the way that they're thinking, because, as you know, it's a very dynamic kind of environment. Education is constantly changing, evolving, and I think sometimes we as adults tend to forget that that's happening in the background while we kind of start having kids and doing all these adult stuff and learning how to be an adult. But we kind of have these misconceptions then like coming up. And one of the things is that I think like the traditional pathway is very much an emphasis in most kind of households. You need to get all straight A's, get into A level, and then go straight into university, and that's the only path. Other than that, then you're just like a failure or disappointment type situation. And they kind of create that narrative, and indirectly, I think, put a lot of pressure on their children. But it's not, I don't think it's because they do it intentionally or kind of like want to put that pressure on, but it's because they have such high expectations and such high standards for their kids, and they have a lack of time, I imagine, to take the initiative and kind of educate themselves on the various different pathways that are now available. And the traditional route is kind of like now becoming a little bit less like the ideal route, and more people are focusing on like, well, what is it that I want to do, and how can I achieve what I kind of can achieve? How can I work and be successful, but not work hard, but kind of work smart kind of situation? And the perfect example that I could potentially give you is like this whole, like I speak to parents a lot, and a lot of the time it's like, apprenticeships is absolutely like, oh my God, no, like I need to have a degree and all of this stuff, and there is an apprenticeship degree route and so on. So it's misinformation and so on. And I particularly kind of like I'm a little bit of a champion of vocational courses, and I find it very kind of deflating when I have conversations with some parents and they are just kind of like on this whole stigma and dogma attached to like BTEC courses. And it's kind of like I always see, or I kind of feel like there's always that continuity in the way that they think, and it's always based on like an inferior kind of qualification. Oh, BTEC is inferior, or it's seen as a less of, when in reality BTEC in some cases Some BTECs are much harder than actual A
You have to
levels.
do like coursework and everything.
And in some cases, it's not necessarily about that. It's about playing to your strengths or playing to your child's strengths. Not everyone is a good test taker. Not everyone has the ability to like really do well in exams and so on. So it's about like understanding your strengths and playing to your strengths. And some people are just really good at taking like coursework units and doing vocational things. Some people are just very hands-on and they want to actually be physically involved in order to kind of get them to be stimulated and passionate about something. And the other kind of misconception is that with BTECs, that a lot of parents think that universities don't hold them to the same value, which is absolutely incorrect. So
what
yeah,
would you say is your most favorite aspect of being a teacher?
I think seeing the growth in students, being able to kind of see them develop is really nice, and kind of like, you know, have them achieve what they set out to achieve, or even achieve something that they thought that they could never do because of whatever kind of like, you know, sometimes we're our own worst critics, and sometimes you need that extra person to kind of like, you know, give you that little like jolt and say, yeah, you can do that. Like, don't say you can't, because, you know, you failure is part of success, isn't it? So it's like, you can't accept you. There's no such thing as just always succeeding at everything you do. That's just unrealistic. It's like, yeah. So I think just seeing students develop and go through it, and then hearing some success stories afterwards. And I get a lot of time. I love it when students go to university or go to apprenticeships and so on, and then 3 or 2 years down the line I hear back from them, and they kind of like, or I bump into them somewhere and they're like, oh my God, like I absolutely hated you as a teacher, or as a head of year, but now like I kind of understand why you did what you did.
Yeah.
And why you were, who you were, and so on, and so yeah, so just that gratitude and because that's why I kind of left the world of work or the corporate world to come here, because I wanted to make that difference, and it's nice to see that.
Would you say you're like an emotional kind of person when it comes to students leaving?
Not necessarily. I think I'm more like, I don't think I get emotional, but I think I get proud that they've achieved what they have achieved, and I'm happy for them to kind of like progress into the next stage. And I'm always telling people like, you know, my door's always open. Just because like you're gone doesn't mean you can't ask me for stuff, or, you know, things like that. So I wouldn't say I'm too emotional, but I do like to see successful stories.
A bit of a specific question, but what option did you choose for A-levels, and did you stick by them?
So A-levels, I did business as an A-level.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I did, what else did I do? I did business. I did a finance BTEC course that isn't kind of like running anymore, which had like an industrial placement as well in the summer. And I worked for like BP as like a intern for like 3 months. And at the age of like 16, or it was like 17 and a half or something, I worked for 3 months and I actually got paid, and I was loving that. And then my third subject was geography, which
It's alright, you can be.
I liked it. I did like it. To be fair, it was nice.
History is okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that
Yeah.
Would you ever say like stereotypical views were imposed on you, that like you had to go to university and then you had to do A levels?
Well, I mean, I don't think I had to. It's an interesting story, because as soon as I had no intentions of going to university, I'll be honest with you, okay? Even though I come from a family that is very highly educated, like my mum's got up to a PhD and all of this stuff. So it was kind of an expectation, but it wasn't never like forced. And I'm kind of glad that it wasn't forced. Obviously, when I first told my mum that I'm not going to go to uni, she was a bit sad by the situation. But I think what I did do is that summer when I finished my A-levels, I went and I embarked on a Camp America project.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I went for the summer and I worked in a camp in America, but not a very well-off camp. I intentionally chose a camp that was geared towards like children, to help children or give children an experience who come from disadvantaged kind of families and single parent homes and things of that nature, and inner city kids basically that would never get an opportunity like that. So that was really eye-opening, and that was when I kind of like fell in love with the idea of working with kids and helping them out. And then I came back and I knew that at some point I would want to become a teacher. So I then decided that I would need a degree for that. So I decided to go to uni. And I came back very late, had to go through clearing. And as a result, I had to just choose a university that was kind of like available at the time. So, yeah.
How did you progress to the role that you have at Arlington? And like, can you talk a bit about your responsibilities and what you do?
Yeah, so I think this is my 5th year in the teaching profession. So I left industry and was working as a junior management consultant for a while. And it was very fast paced and, you know, like very methodical and, you know, regimented. But I joined with the intention to obviously expedite my teaching career, because I had it in mind that I was going to maybe start teaching in about like late 30s. But I didn't enjoy corporate, so I just decided to do it a bit earlier. But obviously the monetary aspect, like money and salary, was a big factor. So when I came in, I just retained that like work ethic, and I guess I was noticed as someone who's proactive and kind of gets stuff done. I want to try and stay humble, but the reality is that I have had a quite significantly rapid progression in my teaching career. In comparison to most. So even as an NQT, as a newly qualified teacher, I was hired here straight away as a Key Stage 3 coordinator in maths. So that kind of like, because I've had some leadership experience before and stuff like that in industry, and then that kind of, I did a fairly decent job, I hope, with that. And then the opportunity came to be part of sixth form, and I went for it, and then I became head of year, and I've been head of year sixth form for about 3 or 4 years now.
What are a few responsibilities in your role? Like, what would you say you do?
So my responsibilities are my main responsibilities is the general, like, pastoral care. So the general well-being of the cohort, ensuring that I have a good grasp of attendance within my cohort, making sure that they are kind of catered to, making sure that uniforms are kind of like consistent, general behavior is managed, that the well-being of the kids and stuff is kind of taken care of. And then there are other things like planning of PSHE, ensuring that there is it's an enriched and quite like I try to, as hard as I can, bring as many people as outside in, because I try to bring PSHE to life, and it's not just like, a didactic type situation where the teachers is going through slides and so on. And I try and use that to kind of teach you the transferable skills, because I really am a strong believer in you can be like your credentials and your like grades and what uni you went to and all of that stuff. That's all great, but I'm a firm believer that that's not the determining factor of your success.
It's not enough, like, basically.
Yeah, I don't think it's enough. I think the real world appreciates more like those transferable skills that you kind of learn, right? So it's like, I always think about the three main things, like, are you reliable? Like, so are you kind of like a reliable person? Can I rely on you? Can others rely on
Very
you?
reliable.
Prefix.
Are you trustworthy, right? And are you a team player? Because I believe that a lot of the time people get hired based on, credentials get you into door, but that's not going to get you hired. Like, are you a sociable character? Are you able to kind of like quickly strike common ground with people? And then can people who are potentially hiring you envision themselves working with you every single day? Because that's what goes on in the back of their mind when they're interviewing you. Like, can I actually work with this person? Am I going to be able to crack some jokes with this person and not be like, faced with a HR email the next day, right? And those kind of things, I think, are more important, like the workplace environment. And do you fit the mold? Do you fit, like, are you the appropriate candidate in terms of the culture of that business? Every business has a way, or every organization has a certain ethos or certain way of doing things, and that stems from their cultural kind of understanding, right? So those are the kind of things that I think are a bit more important than just your academic credentials. And that's why I try and make PSHE something that exposes students to a variety of different things so that they can build those experiences and strike common ground with people.
So, how would you compare the education system to when you were younger, like when you were in school back then to now? Like, what's the difference?
Back then.
No,
You make me sound very old,
You are.
but I am a bit. I mean, it's really not that different, I would say. I think generally the expectation and the level of kind of like the level has changed. But that's obviously a given, because with every generation should theoretically be better than the next generation, and we should all be kind of like evolving and adapting and kind of like being, learning from the past generation. So I don't see that as a different. I think I embrace that. I think it should be more difficult. So like, what you guys are doing should be different to what I did back then, just because of natural progression, right? So I think the institutions and the hierarchy and the way things are done are a little bit more progressive these days. I think there's more, and rightfully so, by the way. I think there's more emphasis on inclusivity. There's more emphasis on equalities and making sure that every kind of student in the classroom is represented, is given kind of like being made feel like that they're part of it, and it's not, and that stems from all the way from the way that you kind of teachers are having to kind of speak to people, to like the examples that you're being given, right? So yeah, I think that's the main thing that's more different. It's about kind of like embracing diversity a little bit more, when I don't think that was... It was there, but it wasn't the forefront of education. And I'm quite happy to see that change.
Would you say there's like education's getting harder and like more difficult because of like the competition out there, like in like today's world?
I don't know if it's getting harder. I don't think it's getting harder, but I think technology is making a lot of students or the younger generation's a little bit more lethargic. And I think, I mean, I was just saying this to my class today, like technology is great. It's increased our productivity. It's made us be very efficient. But at the same time, it's not always dependable. If you rely too much on, like, let's say navigations and GPSs, and the battery dies or it starts malfunctioning, are you going to be able to drive yourself home, or are you going to have to So these are the kind of things, if you don't have a signal, are you still able to read a map? Like, do you know how to use a compass? Like that kind of stuff, right? Like things that we take for granted, I think, because we know kind of like in the back of our heads, I can always Google that. I can always like use this kind of app or whatever. So I think that, so I don't think it's harder. I think that there is an expectation where because of technology, I feel like the new generations are always looking for a quick answer as opposed to just putting in the work. Right? It's like, it's like, do the research. Stop trying to find a perfect essay that's already written for you on Google, right? Because the amount of time that you spend doing that, you could have already written your own kind of essay, right? So those are the kind of things that I think should be. And I also think that because of like things like TikTok and Instagram and all of this kind of stuff, it's kind of made people, including myself, a little bit impatient and a little bit like more easily distractible because you lose focus, right? You're used to like 10-minute, 15 or 10 seconds, 15-minute kind of videos, right? If something goes beyond that, you're like, oh, I've lost interest. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of like takes away the ability to just sit down and just focus on one thing for a longer period of time. So that's what I think. Yeah.
When you started teaching for the first time, did you find anything difficult? And if not, something you mildly disliked?
I mean, I found... What did I find difficult? I think I found difficult sometimes the ability to explain something in a way that something that I just understood and I know to then kind of explain it. So like, for instance, like some economic concepts I had to kind of think about, well, how would I explain this to a student? But when I taught maths, for instance, it was fairly easier for me to do that because maths was never something that came naturally to me. I had to work super, super hard and really learn all those little tricks and things like that and different ways of doing things in order to grasp the subject and kind of master it. So then naturally, when it came to being a maths teacher for a short period of time, I then was able to kind of give multiple different ways of doing things. And I find that like people who are naturally good at maths, they're just like, well, the answer is this because the answer is this. Like, what do you mean you don't know how to do? Do you know, like they don't, because it comes so naturally to them, they are not in a position to just kind of like be explaining, like, because they themselves don't know why they've come to that kind of understanding. It just comes naturally to them. So for me, it took a long time for me to just like sit there and be like, okay, if I pose this question, what could be the possible questions that kids would... So sometimes I would literally sit there and write possible questions that students would ask in the class, and then I would kind of answer them. So I'd be getting ready for those types of questions, and how would I answer that if someone doesn't understand this? Because I didn't want to be in a position where someone asks something and I'm like, I know why, but I can't explain it to you, because it's like, well, then why are you a teacher? So that's kind of like, I think, was difficult. Yeah.
Would you say there's a balance between your social life school life as like being a teacher and family life, personal life?
I would say yes, but my wife would say no. But I'm just like very proactive. I just don't like when I get home, I look at my emails and I just kind of like, I always want to, I have this philosophy and I've always had this, is that every day is a fresh day and I don't want to bring something that was yesterday's, something that I could have done yesterday into the next day. I just don't want to do that. So if it's emails, if it's things, I wouldn't kind of like shut off until that's completed. And I think sometimes it does get in the way, but that's the reality of the job as well. It's like not a 9 to 3 job. It's not an 8 to 4 job. Like people have this misconception about teachers, like, you know, kind of just like working until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock and then going home and having a relaxed day. But that's not the case, especially when you're a middle leader or a pastoral lead or something like that. Most of the day is kind of spent doing all of that stuff. And then when you kind of get home, you then have to have time to actually think about, okay, what am I actually teaching tomorrow? And am I ready for that class? And are my resources up to date? You know, have I put enough challenge into this? Have I kind of, you know, how am I going to test, you know, what's the link topic from the previous lessons that is related to this? And should I be doing a like retention recall with them or something like that? So, yeah, but I do try my best to kind of switch off. But it's hard sometimes, especially the higher you go, the more responsibilities you have, and that's the reality of the situation.
What do you think about the growing influence of vapes within the younger years?
I think it's really bad. I think again, I'm an economics teacher, so I'm gonna say there's definitely an element of government failure.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, doing that, but then in terms of regulating that market. But then it's always the case. It's like we kind of live in a society where we are reactive as opposed to proactive. So like we know there is something wrong with a street where people are always speeding, but nothing gets done until some tragic accident happens. And then there is like speed bumps and things like that put in place, right? So, and I think that's the thing here. And I think it's the inefficiencies of the government to keep up with the kind of private sector. I think they grow so much faster and so rapidly. And I think the real dangers of vapes are not being communicated really well. There's a lack of information out there about it. That's why I kind of like made it a point that the drug talk that you guys had focused a little bit on that. Because, you know, a lot of people don't know that, you know, what you're inhaling is literally steam that has, you know, droplets of oil in it, and that's going into your lung, and that's kind of like, you know, the long-term effects of that are really detrimental. And some would say that it's probably more dangerous than cigarette smoke in some cases. I mean, I'm not the expert or whatever, but, you know, the literature is there. I think also companies who make all these, like, you know, indirectly they package things.
It's advertised.
And advertise
to them as well.
And there's no laws against it at the minute, I don't think, in terms of advertising. But they also make it very attractive, right? Very colourful.
Flavors.
The flavours are very kind of like, you know, in sync with like what kids like these days and so on. And you know, the same is said with the whole edible industry as well, right? They make those things very kind of, you know, you almost, you think that it's like a candy or a sweet or something, but it's not, right? It has like levels of CPD in it or it has levels of THC in it, or so on, and those are. I think they have some responsibility to take, and those companies should have kind of like some moral consideration for what they're doing.
If you weren't a teacher, what other kinds of profession would you pick up?
That's a really, really good question. So I probably, if I didn't become a teacher, I'll probably just stick to being a management consultant, change management. I think because my whole thing is the reason why I went into management consulting or change management is because I like to make a difference. Like, I like to do something that keeps me challenged, and I really like problem solving. So those are the kind of things that I would like to do. So it'll be something along the lines of problem solving or thinking on my feet, that kind of stuff.
So, you know, when you like taught for the first time, what did you find difficult, and like have you crossed that obstacle?
Talked for the first time?
No, when you taught for the
Oh,
first
when I
time.
taught for the first time. When I taught for the first time, the main obstacle was like sticking to time, which I think I'm having a problem with now.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, I tend to, I had, like, you know, you have set lessons, and you kind of have to, when you first start being a teacher, you have to create these lesson plans, and you have to kind of time yourself and say, right, I'm going to spend 10 minutes on this, then 20 minutes on this, 5 minutes on this, and so on. And that was a very big challenge for me, because I just didn't, my whole thing was that, you know, I'm not going to do, like, if I always bumped heads with my mentor, because they were like, well, you're not sticking to the time. You're not covering as much as you're supposed to, and so on. But my argument was always, and I'm still a firm believer of it, is that, well, I'm not going to move on to something if I'm not 100% sure that the kids actually get it. Because then all that does is it creates more work later on.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I need to, like, it's like building a house, right? You got to put the foundations in before you kind of like start putting in the bricks and cement and this and that, right? It's a process. It's not a one-off event, right? So that was, I think, challenging for me. Yeah.
Something. If you could give us any advice, what would it be?
It would be to, in life, I guess, like, don't look down on anything or anyone or any kind of experience that you guys are getting. Always treat people with the utmost respect, because you don't know if that's the person that's going to have a golden ticket for you, and that's possibly going to recommend you to do something. I think always be respectful, treat other people how you would like to be treated at all times. Make sure that you are dependable, you are trustworthy, and you are a team player. And even if you don't like something, have some understanding about it, because someone else might like that.
Why are you doing shots?
So for instance, if you don't like cricket or you know, if you don't like, I don't know, golf or whatever, like, someone else might, and that could be your way to kind of like strike common ground. So the more well-rounded you are, the more like knowledgeable you are, the better you will kind of be able to socialize. And it's all about that. It's about making connections, linking with people, and showing people that, you know, you are a recommendable person for certain things.
And then I believe that's going to be a wrap.
You know, accepting to film the podcast with us. That was very appreciated.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, of course, it was with us. Signing off, Kritika.
Amber.
And Pharmaca. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.